Anti-Christian policies in the Roman Empire occurred intermittently over a period of about 3 centuries until the 313 Edict of Philip issued by Emperors Constantine the Great and Licinius. When Christianity was legalized, these persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire were carried out by local authorities on a sporadic and ad hoc basis, often more according to the whims of the local community than to the opinion of imperial authority. These persecutions heavily influenced the development of Christianity, shaping Christian theology and the structure of the Church. Among other things, persecution gave rise to many saints' cults, may have contributed to the rapid spread of Christianity and sparked written explanations and defenses of the Christian religion. Duration and extent. Anti-Christian policies directed at the early Church had occurred sporadically and in localized areas since its beginning. The first persecution of Christians organized by the Roman government took place under the Emperor Nero in 64 AD after the Great Fire of Rome, with the passage in 313 AD of the Edict of Milan. Anti-Christian policies directed against Christians by the Roman government ceased. The total number of Christians who lost their lives because of these persecutions is unknown, although early church historian Eusebius, whose works are the only source for many of these events, speaks of great multitudes having perished. He is thought by many scholars today to have exaggerated their numbers. Although provincial governors in the Roman Empire had a great deal of personal discretion and power to do what they felt was needed in their jurisdiction, and there were local and sporadic incidents of persecution and mob violence against Christians. For most of the first 300 years of Christian history, Christians were able to live in peace, practice professions, and rise to positions of responsibility. Only for approximately 10 out of the first 300 years of the Church's history were Christians executed due to orders from a Roman emperor. Reasons: public interest. Without agitation from the public, the Roman government had little motivation to persecute local Christians. However, because of the premise of secrecy of their rituals, Christians frequently aroused suspicion among the pagan population accustomed to religion as a public event. Beliefs developed that Christians committed flagitious, scelerat, and maleficia, outrageous crimes, wickedness, and evil deeds, specifically cannibalism and incest, due to their rumored practices of eating the blood and body of Christ and referring to each other as brothers and sisters. Christians' refusal to participate in public religion was as problematic to the populace as it was to the elites, and contributed to the general hostility toward Christians. Much of the pagan populace maintained a sense that bad things would happen if the established pagan gods were not respected and worshipped properly. Edward Gibbon wrote, "By embracing the faith of the gospel, the Christians incurred the supposed guilt of an unnatural and unpardonable offense. They dissolved the sacred ties of custom and education, violated the religious institutions of their country, and presumptuously despised whatever their fathers had believed as true, or had reverenced as sacred." Gibbon argued that the seeming tendency of Christian converts to renounce their family and country, their dislike for the common business and pleasures of life, and the frequent predictions of impending disasters instilled a feeling of apprehension in the pagan neighbors. As Christianity became more widespread and better understood, however, these suspicions faded away. Legal basis. Due to the informal and personality-driven nature of the Roman legal system, nothing other than a prosecutor, a charge of Christianity, and a governor willing to punish on that charge was required to bring a legal case against a Christian. Roman law was largely concerned with property rights, leaving many gaps in criminal and public law. Thus the process cognitia extra ordinem filled the legal void left by both code and court. All provincial governors had the right to run trials in this way as part of their imperium in the province. In cognitia extra ordinem, an accuser called of delator brought before the governor an individual to be charged with a certain offense. In this case, that of being a Christian. This delator was prepared to act as the prosecutor for the trial, and could be rewarded with some of the accused's property if he made an adequate case, or charged with calumny if his case was insufficient. If the governor agreed to hear the case, and he was free not to, he oversaw the trial from start to finish. He heard the arguments, decided on the verdict, and passed the sentence. Christians sometimes offered themselves up for punishment, and the hearings of such voluntary martyrs were conducted in the same way. More often than not, the outcome of the case was wholly subject to the governor's personal opinion, while some tried to rely on precedent or imperial opinion where they could, as evidenced by Pliny the Younger's letter to Trajan concerning the Christians. Such guidance was often unavailable. In many cases, months and weeks' travel away from Rome, these governors had to make decisions about running their provinces according to their own instincts and knowledge. Even if these governors had easy access to the city, they would not have found much official legal guidance on the matter of the Christians. Before the anti-Christian policies under Decius beginning in 250, there was no empire-wide edict against the Christians, and the only solid precedent was that set by Trajan in his reply to Pliny. The name of Christian alone was sufficient grounds for punishment, and Christians were not to be sought out by the government. There is speculation that Christians were also condemned for contumacia, disobedience toward the magistrate, akin to the modern contempt of court, but the evidence on this matter is mixed. Melito of Sardis later asserted that Antoninus Pius ordered that Christians were not to be executed without proper trial. Given the lack of guidance and distance of imperial supervision, the outcomes of the trials of Christians varied widely. Many followed Pliny's formula. They asked if the accused individuals were Christians, gave those who answered in the affirmative a chance to recant, and offered those who denied or recanted a chance to prove their sincerity by making a sacrifice to the Roman gods and swearing by the emperor's genius. Those who persisted were executed. According to the Christian apologist Tertullian, some governors in Africa helped accused Christians secure acquittals or refused to bring them to trial. Overall, Roman governors were more interested in making apostates than martyrs. One proconsul of Asia, Arrius Antoninus, when confronted with a group of voluntary martyrs during one of his assize tours, sent a few to be executed and snapped at the rest, "If you want to die, you wretches, you can use ropes or precipices." During the Great Persecution, which lasted from 303 to 312 313, governors were given direct edicts from the emperor. Christian churches and texts were to be destroyed, meeting for Christian worship was forbidden, and those Christians who refused to recant lost their legal rights. Later, it was ordered that Christian clergy be arrested and that all inhabitants of the empire sacrifice to the gods. Still, no specific punishment was prescribed by these edicts, and governors retained the leeway afforded to them by distance. Lactantius reported that some governors claimed to have shed no Christian blood, and there is evidence that others turned a blind eye to evasions of the edict or only enforced it when absolutely necessary. When an imperial edict ordering clemency to jailed Christians was eventually issued, governors eagerly cleared their overcrowded jails. Government motivation: when a governor was sent to a province, he was charged with the task of keeping it pacater quieter, settled and orderly. His primary interest would be to keep the populace happy. Thus, when unrest against the Christians arose in his jurisdiction, he would be inclined to placate it with appeasement lest the populace vent itself in riots and lynching. Political leaders in the Roman Empire were also public cult leaders. Roman religion revolved around public ceremonies and sacrifices. Personal belief was not as central an element as it is in many modern faiths. Thus, while the private beliefs of Christians may have been largely immaterial to many Roman elites, This public religious practice was in their estimation critical to the social and political well-being of both the local community and the empire as a whole. Honoring tradition in the right way, pietas, was key to stability and success. Hence the Romans protected the integrity of cults practiced by communities under their rule, seeing it as inherently correct to honor one's ancestral traditions. For this reason the Romans for a long time tolerated the highly exclusive Jewish sect, even though some Romans despise it. Historian H. Ben Sasson has proposed that the crisis under Caligula was the first open break between Rome and the Jews. After the First Jewish-Roman War, Jews were officially allowed to practice their religion as long as they paid the Jewish tax. There is debate among historians over whether the Roman government simply saw Christians as a sect of Judaism prior to Nerva's modification of the tax in 96. From then on, practicing Jews paid the tax while Christians did not, providing hard evidence of an official distinction. Part of the Roman disdain for Christianity, then, arose in large part from the sense that it was bad for society. In the 3rd century, the Neoplatonist philosopher Porphyry wrote, "How can people not be in every way impious and atheistic who have apostatized from the customs of our ancestors through which every nation and city is sustained? What else are they than fighters against God, once distinguished from Judaism?" Christianity was no longer seen as simply a bizarre sect of an old and venerable religion, it was a superstition. Superstition had for the Romans a much more powerful and dangerous connotation than it does for much of the Western world today. To them, this term meant a set of religious practices that were not only different, but corrosive to society, disturbing a man's mind in such a way that he is really going insane, and causing him to lose humanitas. The persecution of superstitious sects was hardly unheard of in Roman history. An unnamed foreign cult was persecuted during a drought in 428 BCE. Some initiates of the Bacchic cult were executed when deemed out of hand in 186 BCE, and measures were taken against the Druids during the early Principate. Even so, the level of persecution experienced by any given community of Christians still depended upon how threatening the local official deemed this new superstition to be. Christians' beliefs would not have endeared them to many government officials. They worshipped a convicted criminal, refused to swear by the emperor's genius, harshly criticized Rome in their holy books, and suspiciously conducted their rites in private.